Hello, welcome to I Got Board Game Friday review. Friday! And so today we are going over a game that's when did this come out? Do you have any of the pages open? I always forget to look that up.
Let me look it up right now, but you can talk
So
about the game while I'm doing
yeah,
this.
we are looking at a game that is strictly two-player. So maybe this is a good time to be playing that if you have someone immediately available to play games with. Two-player game, and it's essentially for those of you like fighting video games like Street Fighter, Tekken, Mortal Kombat, list goes on. It's basically a fighting game turned into a card game, and
2016.
that, huh?
2016.
Okay, yeah. So it's not that long ago. Not that long ago, and it's by Level 99 Games, and the game we're talking about today is
Is dun, da, 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 1 second. Bam! Exceed!
Exceed. Exceed fighting system, but we just everyone calls it Exceed. And so Exceed is, like I mentioned, by Level 99 Games for two players. The box says it plays in 10 to 20 minutes, which actually I think is pretty accurate. It can be very fast, or if you want to be more thinking about it, you can kind of like in a fighting game, like knowing when to turtle, when to be aggressive. But before we go into that,
Turtle
I'll
worst.
do a very quick look at what
Turtlers are the worst.
turtle. Hey, you know what? You just talked about the range character. What's wrong with you?
That's not
so,
turtling. That's zoning. That's a
so
zoning
we're gonna get
test.
started by looking at just basically a picture of the setup of how it'll look like when you're playing, and I'll just go over very briefly the flow of the game. So let me share that right now. So this is what it looks like when it is set up. You basically have the whole thing is cards. So even the middle brown section, that board is just cards that you lay out as your board, your kind of 2D plane, where then you'll have your characters, which are also indicated by cards like on here and here. And so this is your 2D plane that you'll be able to move back and forth on when you're fighting. And you're basically going to have cards in your hand, and you're going to first start the whole game by choosing your character. There are multiple characters in a set, and there's multiple sets per season. So if you get it all, you'll have up to 16 characters to choose from. You'll choose a character. They have their own deck. You shuffle it. Like you just take out the character card and shuffle everything else. Draw your starting hand. And then you just basically take turns, alternating back and forth, taking your turn, where you're basically playing one card a turn. And it could be using cards to move, or the main objective to strike each other. You're going to play a card face down, and then this is the only part of the game that's simultaneous, right? Normally you're going back and forth turn by turn, but when someone decides to do a strike, both players have to play a card from hand face down and reveal it, and then those cards all have stats on them on the left side here, as you can see, which indicate the speed, the range, and the power of the attack, and then maybe some like bonus armor or
Stun guard.
stun guard. And so then you'll compare to see who's faster. Then who's ever faster gets to resolve their attack first. And then there's certain abilities on the card too, saying things that happen before you strike or during the strike, or if your attack actually hits because the person is within the range of the attack. And so you resolve all that. Then you'll see if the other person actually got hit, if they had enough guard or stun guard to not get stunned. And if they had enough, then they would resolve their card. Otherwise, they're stunned and their turn is gone. And you'll go back and forth, basically playing these cards at the right time, getting in the right position to fight each other, like in a fighting video game. And you trying to take down each other's 30 life points first. And that is basically the game.
Mm-hmm. Also, just make sure this is not to be confused with Level 99's other fighting game, BattleCon, which is a different game than Exceed, but it was developed by the same company.
Yes. So BattleCon came first years before Exceed, and that one was had more components to it, so it was slightly more of a board game with tokens and such. where then Exceed came later and kind of, I saw it as streamlining a lot of that feel into purely just cards. And then the other thing is I'm going to be showing a lot of the Exceed stuff that I have because I have a lot of it from backing it on Kickstarters at least twice.
Giant box.
This box, though, there's nothing in it because I put everything else in my bigger box. This is an example of like a season 1 box. And so you can see one season 1 box like this size, this long rectangle shape with 4 characters in it. So they're all 4 characters decks. And so none of the characters are repeated in each box. So in season 1, there's 4 of these kinds of boxes. So in total, like I mentioned, if you get it all, it'll be 16 characters. I think retail season 1 is like $25. You can maybe get it for $20 online on like Amazon or something. And then there's a total of 5 seasons so far actually, and it kind of just depends on what theme you're into. Season 2 had kind of a bigger box, bigger development, nicer art upgrade, graphic design upgrades. So season 2 has this bigger box and 4 of these with its 4 characters. Mm-hmm. And I forgot to mention, season 1's characters are from Red Horizon, right? Which is a property by Jasco. It's a video game property, right? Mm-hmm. And then season 2 is with Seventh Cross, which is actually another IP by Level 99 Games, and it actually hasn't even released yet. That game itself, probably next year. But that's been in development for a while. And then season 3, they got the rights to Street Fighter. So it's the same kind of size box as season 2, but obviously with all the Street Fighter Capcom characters that they got the rights to for this, and each one also has 4 characters: Sagat, Ryu, Akuma, Zangief. And so again, if you want Street Fighter, there's 4 boxes of these, so 16 characters in total. And then I'll show the season 4 and 5 stuff later because those are ones actually I did not get yet. But then everything that I have together is this heavy box like that.
Ben will be able to start fighting like a fighting game character when he lifts that box up and down a few times.
Yes. Lockdown has made me weak. This box is pretty heavy. I bet you it's like 10 pounds, which is not much, is it?
At least like less than a bag of rice, man. Less than a bag of rice.
At least 10 pounds. So there's a lot. Basically, it's just all the characters they released, and like even these ones you might have seen on the side, like promo characters that they did in conjunction with those property owners.
Red Dragon Inn.
Woo. Yeah, Red Dragon Inn let them use this character in the game, and then Shovel Knight let them use the Shovel Knight.
Hint.
And so some of these are promo characters from Kickstarter, but they're also available on their website. So anyways, aside from basically doing a whole advertisement for their products right now, let's talk about the game itself. As a 2-player fighting game, what makes it interesting, John? What makes it work and not work?
Yeah, so I think just conceptually, I remember, Ben, the first time you told me about it, I was like, seriously? They were able to capture that feeling of a 2-player fighting game in a board game? Because I think when you think of board games, traditionally, it's very much of a, you take your time, people have turns, they kind of sit around and just, figure out your turns and you kind of play through. We've talked about some games that are the real-time games, so it kind of goes fast, but it tends to be co-op or there's different kind of pieces to it. So when this idea was mentioned and Ben showed me, I was like, wow, did they really do that? And can they actually capture the essence and the spirit? And after we played it the first time, I was like, we have to play again, because just like in a fighting game, after you finish a round, you probably want a rematch. Whether you want, well, if you won, you probably don't want a rematch because you won, sucker. But then if you lost, you'd be like, no, a rematch, and you want to start right again. And I actually think that Exceed really does capture that essence and that feel of what a 2-player fighting game is like. And so I know we talked a little bit about kind of the rules and that they're there is a sense, or like when we were just explaining the rules, it just feels like, oh, is that really capturing the game? But I think as you start playing the game and as you start seeing the characters and what you're doing, you start imagining it. So if we, from the picture that Ben showed earlier, there is a kind of layout of a line in which the characters are actually positioned on the board. So you have a character. Oh, Ben's bringing it up now. Thanks, Ben. You have the characters in the middle there that are on the golden kind of card lines, and those each represent spaces in which a character can occupy, right? And so already right there, that's pretty unique in trying to capture that essence, and it does it really well because based on where your characters are at is kind of identifying the range in which a character will be able to attack or defend or attack or strike your opponent characters. And then, as we were saying with the cards, they're all very unique. There's some that are basic, which is across the board for all the characters, but then there's some that are unique, and that's kind of the same in a lot of fighting games. Most characters, and generally speaking, there's a basic amount. If you've ever played fighting games on, in video games, is you have your weak, medium, strongs of punches and kicks, and then there's obviously directional versions, but everybody has a certain sense and a certain style of them. So in this game, similarly, all the characters have a general sense of the same basic attacks, but then what makes it special is that, and as we were showing, each character deck has its own special and unique powers and abilities that only those characters get to do and get to use. And I think that's where you really get to start seeing the genius of these characters and the genius of this game then play out.
Yeah, and so as you mentioned, like a little more specifically, each deck is, I think, just 30 cards. And so it's 2 copies of every card. And so you have 2 copies of all the basic cards that everyone has, like kind of different kind of generic strikes, like throws and stuff from fighting games. And then you have 2 copies of every character's unique cards, including their ultra attack or like their super attack, right? And so it's very simple. Like even just setting it up, it's just like you take the deck, you make sure you put the character card onto the board, you take out the reference card, which every character comes with, which I think is helpful because the reference card just tells you kind of the basic things you can do on your turn. And then you just, all the rest of the cards, you shuffle it, draw your starting hand, and then you can play. And that's basically set up really quick. And then yeah, on that 2D board, right, that plane, that's really like in a fighting game, like you're basically trying to position yourself to strike at the right time. And that's kind of the exciting part, because in my description it might sound boring, like, oh, you just go back and forth, like one card, one card, one card, one card. But it's more like there's 2 resources in the game, one main one called force, which is generated on your turn by discarding cards from your hand. So any card you discard gets you 1 force, and it's kind of like a temporary resource. And if you discard like an ultra card, it gets you 2 force. But as you basically are choosing which cards you want to keep and hopefully attack with later, and then having to choose which ones to discard, like that can be a little tough, right? That's like kind of the strategizing part, right? The planning part. And so that's kind of like the small, tough decisions to make. But then as you generate force on your turn, that allows you to move that many number of spaces or play cards as for their second effect, because I think almost all the cards have a boost effect, which is like the bottom portion of the card. And it's basically using force, that temporary resource, to play the card face up in front of you to get a temporary bonus when the next strike happens. And so that's another thing you can do to plan ahead. Like you're trying to set up like, oh, I want to attack with this card, but I also know to hit with this one, I need to have enough speed to attack first. So maybe I'll pay to play this card and get rid of it as a boost and get that speed bonus. And so that's kind of another small thing that's cool, like at least the dual, or I guess it's technically like 3 uses for a card, right? Discarding for force, playing as a boost, or using it as a strike. So that's a really cool way to give a card multiple uses.
And as Ben was talking about the resource, that's the first one is force, and then there's a second resource which is also called gauge. And so also in, well, thinking of like Street Fighter as a typically, and I think Mortal Kombat and a couple other games have similar things, is that as you progress and play through a match, in those games you kind of have this little bar that grows, your gauge bar, that lets you activate your special abilities or your ultra abilities. And so by the way you get the gauge in this game is by striking, and by successfully striking or successfully completing a strike against the other player in some capacity. And then basically when that strike happens and it succeeds, which means it has to hit, or it has to hit mainly is the primary thing. Whether it deals damage or not may not necessarily be the case, but as long as it hits, or if it says otherwise that you can gain it as gauge, then it's building up your gauge. Just like in fighting games, if you know this mechanic, is when you're striking your opponents, whether they're blocking or not, that's how you kind of gain, gauge over time, right? And so once you gain enough gauge, those can also be used as force, so you can kind of store those up as force to be used for other turns as well. But you can also use your gauges to transform your character, which is a very unique thing about this game, right? So all the characters, as we were showing, they're all unique. They all have their own special abilities, their own special powers. Some of them, like one of the characters has like a bear token. So some fighting games, you have like a little familiar that fights with you. So there's some characters that represent that. Some characters have like abilities to move faster or have stunning abilities, or do like special strike attacks or things like that. Different ways that are unique to that particular character. But all of the characters also have a super version of themselves, where it basically upgrades what they might have or transforms them so that things that maybe they set up in their version 1 are now unlockable or utilizable in their ultimate version 2 form. So in some fighting games, that's also the case. You have certain characters that transform and become super powerful, and maybe at the cost of life or whatever, and that kind of plays in this game too. So there's also the secondary aspect of if you're striking successfully, your opponent, or if your opponent is striking you successfully, you could be facing a much more powerful opponent. I will become more powerful once you strike me down.
Yeah, it's cool. Like there is that. I forgot about that. But yeah, that decision to make to basically go to your exceed side of your character, which is, at least in like the season 1 Kickstarter version, it's like a foiled shiny side of the character. And something to be clear about that we didn't explain specifically, but John has mentioned like each character being different with their different powers. So the character card that we were pointing out, each character actually has their own special ability. So it's not just their own like unique cards in their deck, but that character has an ability. And that's like one of my favorite parts of games, variable player powers. And this one makes it very, very distinct because it really affects how each character plays, which is fitting with any fighting game, right? To have characters feel different and try to do different things. And so in this one, you have a character that always tries to keep advantage, which is kind of being the tie-breaking character during a strike. Or you have characters who try to generate gauge faster, or you have characters that can do an EX attack with a little more boost to it. An EX attack is another thing that I didn't mention, right? Taken from like Street Fighter, right? Where you have 2 copies of every attack card in your deck. And so if you happen to have both of them, you can actually play them together during a strike to do the same attack, but with a little more boosted, I believe, speed and attack damage. And so it's just like another small mechanic, which is interesting and taken basically straight from fighting video games. But yeah, so those are some examples I was mentioning of just like the way the characters are actually inherently different from each other and their abilities and how they play, which I really like.
And yeah, just kind of talking about it and thinking about it, like as the game plays, it really does have that sense and that feel of an actual fighting game. And I know we've kind of referenced this a few times already, but when we've been talking about these pieces of the rules and how you play the game or these types of things you want to think about, it's like this is all the same things that you would be thinking about in a fighting game, right? Like when you're playing a video game of Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, Killer Instinct, Blaze Blue, all the other fighting games. There's a lot of them out there. You can, if you're watching this, you probably know of a number of these games as well. But basically, it takes a lot, as we were just saying, it takes a lot of those mechanics, and then it's in these games. And that's why, like, as we were saying, these games don't take a lot of time in reality, right? Because one thing is the decks are only 30 cards, and I think you're allowed to shuffle through the deck one time. But if you have to shuffle through it again the second time,
there's a limit of like choosing when.
There's only a certain amount of times you can play through your deck, because basically that's your time over. So if you run out of cards, I'm just
going to show this character while you're talking.
Yeah, so Ben is showing off an example of the character cards that we keep referencing to and talking about. So that's the one side, and then their kind of flip side, the EX side, or the Exceed side.
This was a promo chibi version of the character. Because this is like very anime heavy art style.
Mm-hmm. And so
reference cards.
Yeah, and the reference card, the different things that your character does.
Then all the cards that you just shuffle and play with.
All the cards. And yeah, like I think as you play this game, it's just really thinking about it. So, and this is where it's like, as you play this game, it's also kind of like a fighting game too, where the more you play this game and learn about the different characters and stuff, you can start, what's the word? Not guessing, but kind of you get a sense of what they can do or could do, because you've seen the cards they've played, because of the discard piles. When you're playing the cards or you're using the cards, you see what people have used. And so there's a basic amount of cards that everybody has, all the characters have. So you can kind of know they've already used certain cards, so they're not going to be able to get them later. So they've kind of used up their attack powers and their strikes in certain ways. But you also know that they have their very unique skills and abilities that you don't know if that person has in their hand or not, right? And that makes it extra interesting, because then it's like, okay, do they have that power that, if this is a character that I'm fighting and I know they fight from range, they're pretty far away from me right now. I might be in trouble. I might need to spend my next turn just trying to close the gap between myself and that person before they get a chance to strike me. Or I take a chance and I'll try to strike them because I think I'm faster. And I have a card that lets me move before I attack. So I get to move and then do my strike. And because I'm faster, I'll be able to hit them. And then they won't be able to hit me, right? And then you kind of start playing like that type of game, which is part of fighting games. That feeling of there are characters that will try to rush in and kind of attack you. So if they time it at the right time, you're going to get hit. But if you anticipate that they're going to try to do that, you can prepare yourself, and then they miss, right? And so that feeling is mirrored in this game a lot too, where if someone tries to attack and they completely miss or whiff their attack, you usually have a very good opportunity to, within the same strike, hit them back or be able to attack them right after that, because they basically used up their resources at that time. And so now you have the chance to hit them, because you don't draw cards back naturally. You have to take force, or you have to take an action or take force to actually get cards back in your hand.
I think it's one of the basic actions to draw cards. So that is kind of the card game, board game feeling of the game. That part of like where you need to pace yourself, right? Of like, okay, I'm gonna use this whole turn to draw cards, because they're far and they're probably like more of a melee person. So I'll take this time to do that, so I have enough cards for the next few turns to do what I need to. And then and what you were describing, I really do like that part that they captured of the trying to read your opponent, right? Where of course, like in the board game way, there is that little bit of card counting that's possible, right? Because like you could see like, oh, in your gauge pile over there, your super meter, where your cards go to indicate that you have super meter. Like I see you have like these generic cards there, so you don't have those in your hand right now. And those are maybe the ones that, keep you, like maybe it could be the block card that prevents a lot of damage. And so it's like, okay, I know you can't block if I am to just hit you really hard, And then, even that is just like a small part, right? Like it's not heavy card counting kind of at all, but it's more about then reading your opponent. Like, would they try to attack right now, or are they still trying to get in position, or like what do they actually need right now? And so I really like that part, because then it also feels great when you guess correctly, right? Like the scenario you were describing where it's like they whiff their attack, and then the card you happen to play during the strike they are within range, and it's like, well, sucks for you for trying to attack me, But then that's the part where then I could easily imagine happening in a game, right? Where it's like it's not each card is like some huge part of a fighting game fight, but it's literally the individual moves that you're doing. So you can actually picture like someone trying to play a card that's kind of like a move forward and attack, but then you did an attack that was faster that let you move back far enough or something. And so they miss, and then you
and the funny part is you're saying that with that kind of attack, sometimes you can over gauge as a player or over read, and you might anticipate that the person is going to try to retreat faster than you. So you're reading, if they retreat at a certain distance, then I'll be able to dash and attack them because they tried to back away from me, but I misgauged it and I realized I'm dashing too fast. So you end up actually passing the person and not being able to strike them, right? So, and that has happened, I think, in a couple times as we played the game too, where it's that feeling of in a video game when you're learning your characters, like in a fighting game, sometimes you over anticipate your attacks, and then they can take advantage of that, or you're just at least put in a worse position than you realize, and you're like, oh, okay, well, now I got to figure out how I'm going to recover from the situation.
And I think for all the fighting games we mentioned, I think it's really cool to kind of realize how much the game takes just parts of all these games, like probably the most generic would be Street Fighter, right? The most like foundational to take from. And so you have like the EX attacks, super
Fighting
meter.
Words.
What? You want to say Mortal Kombat?
I don't know. I'm not as into all the fighting games as I used to be, but some people might question you.
But like EX attacks, super meter, right, from like Street Fighter. But then you also have like the character Miska, who has like a bear companion, which is more like anime styled fighting games have those, right? And then you also have you have the boosts, which I also think are more from like anime style fighting games, right? Like characters that have a way to kind of temporarily like charge up something, right? To help them be aggressive, aggro, or like some kind of super armor or something, right? So you have like boosts that are like that. And so, I think it's just really cool that it takes from all these different things that you see in different fighting games and brings it together in a way that works really well, keeps the pacing of a fighting game. And I think actually when you're talking, I was thinking about like the small details of like the block card. I think usually, like you're saying, you have to hit with your attack to then be able to set that aside as like gauge. Where if you block successfully, you set that aside as gauge, which does happen in a lot of fighting games, right? Like those who do block can build up gauge that way too. And so like that's even just a small detail. I think that was smart for them to think of.
Yeah. And that's actually one other thing when we're bringing up block too is, in a fighting game, of course, defense is also important. So we were talking about the stats of the cards, which I think some of them are pretty obvious: range, speed, and power of your hits. But one of the things we didn't talk about is armor and stun guard as well. That works in this game. So there's very few cards that have armor in this game because armor is straight like pure defense, and I think block is like one of the only cards that actually has armor. There might be character cards occasionally that have specific armor, but pretty much that's one of the only cards that it can actually directly negate damage being taken for the most part.
A certain amount
of damage. It's a good amount, or I think block you can use force to actually increase the amount.
Yeah, so normally armor as like a trait on the card will be another number under power, speed, range, and then for the block card specifically, you can spend
it's like a certain amount plus any additional force that you'd like to increase.
Or it's like 2 per force, I think.
Yeah, or 2 per force or something. But then there's another piece which is also stun guard. So one of the things in a fighting game, of course, is comboing, right? So the sense of comboing or the sense of being hit, and when you get hit, there is a stunned feel to your character as they're getting hit by maybe one or multiple hits. And that this game also captures that, where when you hit, there's a certain amount of damage that's done. And if the player who's being hit by the card, if the card they played as a strike doesn't have a certain level of stun guard, they're stunned, which means they won't be able to strike or attack or be able to do their hit, right? So you actually also even then get to capture that hit, right? So in fighting games, if you hit faster and hard or faster with the right amount of damage, you're going to prevent another player from being able to keep doing their actions, and which means you continue your combos, right? So in this game, it kind of captures it in the board game way of that, where it's basically if you can hit them fast enough and deal enough damage, you're basically going to be able to allow yourself to do more combos or more hits quickly, right? Versus, but then if the other player still plays a card that is kind of, in a fighting game sense, ready or prepared that yes, they got hit, but it's not hard enough that they're not going to be able to hit you back, right? That feel. So you kind of get that sense.
Yeah, that is part of also the pacing and tempo I was mentioning too, which I think is what you actually can envision, right? Where it's like someone is attacking, but it was just like a really like light jab, then you can still pull off your bigger attack, you know? That's like literally just that part of the fight that happens when you play those two cards, you know? And so, and then another small thing is since it is like not a real-time game, like you're taking turns, I did mention the idea of having advantage, which is kind of being the tie-breaking character, but it's also kind of the first player for that one round, meaning you're playing your card and then your opponent will play a card. So then you can even kind of plan around it timing-wise to not have advantage, but then, you know, your opponent calls a strike, so you both have to play a card, and then their card misses and yours actually hits, and then advantage cycles to you because it just alternates. Then you're going first and you can strike again, right? Call the strike. And then if you're like a character like Reese, one of the characters from season 1,
his favorite,
he is about getting advantage when I think he stuns someone, right? His basic special ability. So then if I can land another hit, then I'm still the first player. So I can keep trying to combo. Yeah, basically combo like in a fighting game, right? Keep going with it if you can keep pulling that off.
And you know, like with that character, if we're going into it a little bit, the reason why you'd want to do that is that it builds his gauge up really fast, right? If he keeps getting advantage, he keeps hitting first, he's building a lot of gauge because, as we were saying, successful strikes give you more gauge, which allows him to either transform to his other version that makes him maybe even better and even stronger with his advantages, or he can start using the gauge to boost his hits, so then he's hitting even harder through his combo hits over and over and over. So there's so many, right?
Or just imagining like just building enough gauge in like 2-3 turns to then use your ultra in your hand, you know?
Exactly.
It's like
something
that's
like
that. In a fighting game, exactly in a fighting game. And so yeah, so that I don't know if there's anything else you want to mention, anything that doesn't work in the game.
I would say regarding the stun mechanic, it is one of those things that's a little frustrating in a board game. I would say is there are situations in which when you do get stun locked over time or you constantly get hit, it is a very frustrating feeling to have, especially in a board game where if it feels like you really can't do anything or you don't really have options to do anything, that gets really, really frustrating and really, really tiring really fast. So there is a little bit being a deck, right? Being a game with a deck and kind of being based on the shuffling of your cards, there is a very randomized element to this game. So there is a comparison that is done, and we mentioned its predecessor, BattleCon, or another game that is actually very much like this, of a fighting game style with two-player combat. But the way that game plays, it's a lot more controlled and tactical, where you actually have direct control over everything that goes on, versus in this game, you are kind of at the mercy of the cards that you draw. So if you draw poorly, you could draw a pretty bad hand that doesn't really have a lot of things you can do at all. And that is an unfortunate part of the game. It's not a big complaint, but it is something that's one of those situations where it's like, I just drew poorly and I don't know if I can really do anything with my situation right now, versus in a fighting game, like to capture that spirit, like that wouldn't usually, like if you're a expert or a veteran at these games, like you're not going to feel that way when you play your character. Like you're going to know how to play your character at the very least. So in that way, this game can kind of get that way sometimes. And again, it's just more of like the sometimes you just have bad hands and you just draw poorly.
And that is kind of the, I mean, coming from BattleCon, which is what we had played first, right? Our first introduction to this kind of fighting game into a board game. Coming from that into then Exceed, which was developed later, it is, I think, part of what happens when they streamline it into just a card game, right? Yeah. And so that's kind of more just to keep in mind is like, if this whole idea of a fighting video game into a board game is appealing to you, then it's more like, would you rather play like a heavier one where you have more control over everything, or would you want a faster one that's just these cards and drawing and playing, basically? I would also say, like, component-wise, not necessarily with the game, but like season 1 component is like the art's okay. Like I do like anime art, and so I think the characters are cool generally, but there is like inconsistency with the art style. Like I don't know if it actually is like different artists who did the different characters for this. And then this kind of paper box is very, very cheap, kind of. And it actually comes with just all the cards inside. And so, like, I mean, they're packaged inside, but as in, like, there's no way to separate it after you've opened it unless you organize it somehow yourself to wrap the cards together. And so if you do get season 1, it's just all the cards are just in here all over the place. And it's like if you have 4 decks of characters, like, you would wish there's a way to keep them all separated, but there isn't just in the box itself, no separation.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I thought they actually had the little cardboard, like...
No, it's actually just like one big cardboard tray inside. And then you can sort the cards into stacks yourself, but then once you put them inside, then you move it, then it's all just gonna slide over each other and get shuffled, basically. Where then season 2 and so on, that's why their boxes are bigger. They actually come with the characters have their own tuck boxes, which is really great. So this is like to go what?
Good job, level 99. You learned.
Yeah, to go against, I think, that issue from season 1, which was obviously their first time producing it, right? So it's not like they're just going to go all out, make it the best immediately. It was functional, right? You could play, and it's a light card game, so that's kind of the feeling with a season 1 box. But then season 2, having a sturdier box, and then inside tuck boxes for every character. And for me personally, it's the right dimensions to fit sleeved cards. It's just, that's beautiful to me. It's so beautiful. Like, it literally is like just the right height so you could like close it with the cards sleeved. So that's beautiful. And then season 2, obviously, like, I actually love the art a lot more. Graphic design to it. Even like the basic cards have like a nicer graphic design, like darker border, and kind of small details like that make the art very consistent. And I do like the kind of world they used for season 2, their own 7th Cross world. Anyway, that ended up being a plus versus a negative. So negative wise, actually, I would say it is very simple to, again, learn how to play versus learning to play well. Takes more time. But I think even the learning how to play can be a little confusing for people when it comes off like most of the game, not the main part of the game, but still kind of a good amount of the time is alternating turns. But then strikes are the only action that happens simultaneously. So learning to get that clear, right, is when you're teaching it, it can be a little confusing, especially because you're trying to, when you do a strike and you're playing cards at the same time and then figuring out how to resolve it and then remembering whose turn is actually next. You know, there's no token to indicate that, basically. You just have to remember that, oh, I actually called the strike and we resolved our cards, and so now it's actually your turn.
And that as you said, that does remind me of times when we were playing that happened pretty regularly. Actually, it was one of those things where it's like, wait, who, like, you struck me and you stunned me, So is it your turn to be at advantage, or is it my turn? And it also didn't help because we had been playing one of the characters that does get advantage when he stuns for a while, but then we started playing other characters, so then that doesn't work that way anymore. So then it's like, wait, whose turn is it now? And you do kind of, it ends up breaking the flow of the game a little bit at that point, because that part seems slightly unintuitive at that point. It doesn't quite feel like the way that you would expect a fighting game to flow, which is why I think it's honestly because all the other parts do capture it pretty well, that when that happens, it doesn't quite feel like it captures it as well. So then you almost kind of get jarred out of being in the experience because it feels a little bit artificial at one point.
Yeah, and that is kind of the small advantage I would give to like BattleCon, which came before, which we're not reviewing right now, but mentioned a lot, because in that one, every turn is playing cards at the same time, right? So in a sense, that is a little more what you would imagine when you're playing a video game, like both players are doing the moves at the same time, versus like in this, if you really imagine it, it's like one person move, another move, and then they both hit, It's
Yeah,
like,
it
that's
does.
a little weird.
You don't get because the strikes are the only simultaneous, like movement and turns are kind of
like imagine a fighting
they're
game
almost
happening
turn
that
based.
way.
It becomes turn based. Yeah, it's almost like I pressed forward and then Ben presses backwards and then Ben presses forward
and then we both do Hadouken.
Right, and then immediately we do the same. We do some kind of a strike at the same time.
Yeah,
that part feels a little bit funky, and that might be because we came from playing BattleCon. So as we mentioned before, so because this was an evolution, if this was your first time experiencing a fighting, like the board game fighting game, like it might feel a little bit better. But because we had seen it with the simultaneous feeling of a similar game play out, that one felt more natural in that sense. Now, again, this is not a review of BattleCon because we could go about a lot of mechanics and things like that from our perspectives on that. But for the purposes of this, like those are negatives, but again, overall, I don't think they're the biggest negatives in the world. It's more like small things to just track. Like the game doesn't break because
yeah. And I think
right.
Even with the last one we were just mentioning of the keeping track of whose turn it is, like I think that does get resolved as you learn to resolve cards faster, basically, because that's kind of a thing, right? To learn like comparing speed and then range on who's ever faster, and then the text on the card. But then there's keywords, right? Like before strike or on hits or after. And so like as you get used to it, then you'll do the whole step faster, resolving the cards, and then you'll more likely remember whose turn it actually was. So I think that's kind of the easy way to kind of say that gets solved. So aside from that, I did want to kind of share some other sets that you guys can get. So I shared season 1, which is from Red Horizon, season 2, which is 7th Cross, season 3 is Street Fighter. Season 4 came out some time ago, but I do not have it. And that is, if you're interested, I'm going to say season 4 and 5 together because they're going to show up together when I share my screen. Season 4 is Shovel Knight. For those of you who enjoyed that indie game, they got the rights to put all the characters from Shovel Knight into its own season. So I think that season is actually maybe only, I might be wrong, but maybe only 8 characters.
I don't know.
I'm not sure. We'll see right now. And then season 5 was actually just announced, I believe, this week. So it's not out yet, but you can pre-order it. And it's for BlazBlue, for those of you into that fighting series. And so this is what it all looks like on their official website, level99store.com if you want to see. So BlazBlue, cool anime art. But actually going on first, I think at the bottom is, you can see all the Shovel Knight characters. So there's solo characters you can get, and they have a play mat you can get with the Shovel Knight characters. Actually, this one might actually just be maybe 10 characters, like 4 in this set, 4 in this set, and then 2 solo characters. Then there are some other ones like
Dead Cells.
Yeah, Dead Cells, kind of a promo standalone character, if you know about that indie roguelite adventure game, right? I don't know this character, but he's a solo character, a robot named Fight. You have all their solo characters together, which I had some shown in when I was showing my whole box of characters that I got over the years. And then moving up, you have the BlazBlue characters. This one is a full season, so 4 boxes of 4 characters each, I believe.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, if you know that fighting game, which I never got into, but I have watched some of it over the years, and does have that cool, stylish anime fighting game look to it.
Mhm.
So am definitely inclined to pre-order this because I think this is like a very fitting case, right? Like literally a fighting game, characters being put into this Exceed fighting system, and it's just the most fitting, you know? So just hoping that they are actually done very unique, even more, you know, like, because they're doing so many characters, right? Like, I don't know, I have 3 seasons, and that's like 40 character, at least 40. 16 times 3. Okay, so at least 50 characters, right? At least
Yep.
with like my promo character and stuff. So probably around like, yeah, 50 characters already, and to still keep making them feel like distinct with their abilities, their own unique cards, not making them basically unbalanced, right? It's
Or
a
maybe slightly
crazy,
unbalanced. I don't know if you
huh?
played the games enough to really know whether it's truly unbalanced or not.
I mean, I did okay. Actually, yeah. Complaint wise or negative wise, there could be cases where certain characters are better against others. I think, you know,
Mhm.
like some that maybe if you have a certain. I mean, I don't know specifically which characters, but there could be cases where it feels like, you know, one range character versus one melee character. The melee character can close distance faster than the range character can run. You know, you might feel that. It's also hard to gauge because of the luck of the draw in this game, you know?
Mhm.
So I think that is also part of what helps keep it feeling balanced, because you could just do better because you drew better for that
Mhm.
game, and you're not really sure if that's the case. So yeah. So those are all the 5 seasons if you guys are interested in getting whichever one seems fitting. Uh I think the
Oh,
last
one thing we didn't mention, can you play characters
mm,
from one season against
mm.
characters of a different season?
Yes, you can, John. Which is actually
Whoa.
really amazing too, because a lot of games that end up with like another edition, you know, or like a standalone set, sometimes they do need like you to upgrade the earlier version with certain cards or something to play together. Where this one you don't. You literally like I had season 1 already. Once I got season 2, you could immediately just take a season 2 character and play against a season 1 character. I mean, the later seasons, I think maybe add a little more things, you know? Like season 2, the characters do have like, almost all the characters have more than just an Exceed side, but like a separate little card that that mentions some other mechanic that you can manage with that character specifically. So they might seem a little more complex, but I wouldn't say it necessarily makes them better though, you know? Like if you can more consistently play a season 1 character because of their mechanic just lets you, like, I don't know, play as aggressive as you want, and it's just simple that way and just keep pummeling, then that works. You know, then you don't have to mess with a more complex character where you have to manage something else, which could seem cooler, but maybe not help you win. So yes, good question,
But
John.
is a win with a simple character truly a win? Just
Yes,
kidding.
it is. Yes, it is. It's more of is a win with an OP character a win, and like,
Yes.
And so the last part we'll get into is our score for Exceed.
Yes.
So what would you give Exceed, John? Because I know you do mention liking BattleCon a lot, and
Yeah,
maybe
this
even
is why
more
it's
than
hard
Exceed.
for me.
Where I will spoil, I am actually a little more partial to Exceed than
Yeah,
BattleCon.
I know
So
you are. Dude. No, just kidding.
And actually, while you're thinking and talking, I'm gonna show off some other stuff I got with.
And I probably should have thought
What's
about
that?
my score actually ahead of time. You'd think
So
we
like
actually think of this ahead of
play
time. We don't.
mats, season 2 play mats. Cool art on it. Neoprene play mats that came with the Kickstarter.
I think for me, I would probably, just thinking about the way we do general ratings and kind of it, I would probably actually give this game an 8.5
Oh wow, that's pretty high.
because, and this is because just, again, purely from some of the things we've talked about, playability of the game, accessibility of the game, whether, kind of thinking about should people be playing this game or not at all, right? Are the mechanics solid, artwork, thematic, all that stuff, right? Kind of compiling it all together. That is why I'll give this one an 8.5. As Ben was mentioning, I actually have more partiality toward BattleCon, which is
Oh
the
man,
predecessor.
is BattleCon a 9?
No. See,
You
that's
don't
why
need
I'm
to tell me
like,
now, but
if we
maybe
do
when we do that one day.
BattleCon, I'm gonna have to think about my rating for that. But I would give Exceed an 8.5 because of those things. Yes, there are small pieces, things that in the end I don't think it pushes up to the 9. Like, that's super like, oh my gosh, like why aren't people just constantly playing this kind of game, right, all of the time? But this is actually pretty close to that. I think part of that is because it is also only a 2-player game, so sometimes when you're doing board game nights and things like that, this is not a game that you're probably going to be able to easily pull out to play with people all of the time. Mainly because like if you have more than just one other person joining you, you're not going to be able to play this game unless you set up a night where you're playing multiple games of Exceed at a time, right? Where you have like, you could set up a tournament, right? You could theoretically set up an Exceed tournament.
Which Level 99 does do, or were doing for a while with their games with the organized play, which is kind of what they call it when they have little tournament kits that they with promos that stores can buy to hold their own tournaments. I
think Exceed gets an 8.5 for me. I think also in the past there was also a little bit of it was the roster size as well, because we had only played really season 1. That's when we played the most games. We played a little bit of season 2, but really season 1 was the only time. So there was only the 16 characters that were out. So it was fun, but it was pretty limited with the number of characters you had. Now that you actually have 50 plus, it might be fun to re-jump back into it, because that was the other thing in comparison to BattleCon for my personal perspective. But that's why, from a rating standpoint, thinking about it, this game really is, if you are looking for 2-player games, competitive 2-player games, this is really something you should consider. And if you're a fighting game aficionado, or even just have had experience with fighting games in your life, you should try this out, because I think you will enjoy it quite a bit. So
yeah, and actually something I didn't mention earlier, since you kind of, well, we mentioned, but I didn't think much about it, but being a 2-player only game, those do often catch my attention more since a couple years ago, because I started like thinking more about like from a design perspective of games, right? Like I have told friends that I think 2-player games are the ones that can be the most creative, most unique, and I think a lot of it, at least kind of thinking about it from a design standpoint, is that there's less stuff you have to balance, like once you have 3, 4, 5 players, 4 being kind of the most common number, right? Like then you always have to start, I think, balancing like the pacing of things, right? Like what happens when player 1 gets these things before player 4, which is 3 turns later, right? 3 players later. And so there's more things to balance between all the players, the things that they can do or can't do, or like how much stuff first player starts with compared to the person who's going last. And so, but with 2 players, then that's cut out, right? It's mainly just back and forth most of the time. And that's a lot less you have to take into account or kind of restrict yourself on to keep it fair. So that's kind of the appeal of 2-player games to me. And so with that, I will say my score, which John doesn't know because we're trying to always have John go first. And so I was surprised you said 8.5 because I gave it
A 7.
8.5.
Ah!
That's so that I was actually like trying not to laugh when you said your score just now. I was like, seriously, man? Seriously? You're just trying to guess my score, are you? So yes, 8.5. Because and actually part of my thinking is also that I wouldn't call Exceed a filler game, but I would call it a light game. And I mean 2.3 is actually even a little bit in my
That's a little
opinion.
bit higher than I would expect from it.
Yeah, I would expect more like 2, maybe even a little less, but probably around 2. But anyways, like yeah, so I would consider it a light game. So it's not kind of in my own mind restricted by the whole, filler game, how much depth there is to it and how high I would actually give a score. And
Mhm.
so yeah, it can go up to 8.5 for me. Because yeah, it captures that fighting game feel surprisingly. I think it was a very smart step of going from BattleCon to Exceeds all card components, just because I think that makes it like much more portable, but then also just easier to set up, right? It's literally what I mentioned. You put out the cards of the board, put your character cards on it, shuffle your deck, and then you can play, So it's like so simple that way. Where then it obviously, we did mention like kind of the weird things that don't exactly translate from a fighting game. And so from a theme standpoint, that is kind of a limitation for me, just kind of knowing in my own mind that it's a little funky, right? Comparing it in all ways to a fighting video game, but it still does capture that kind of tense feel of back and forth and like being to pull off the attack at the right time.
But that's right, it's a fighting system.
Fighting system. And so yeah, and then I do love season two's like characters, like just the bump in quality once they started doing season two. I remember on Kickstarter, I was like, it looks so good. Like art is so good, like more kind of matured, detailed anime art. I don't know if it's like because it's a different artist at that point, but like very colorful, but still a dark setting for that fantasy world. And that kind of shows in its graphic design on the cards, which are nicer, where season one was mostly white, has some like details on the cards, as you can maybe see here, but still mostly white, where then it incorporated like a darker look. And then the quality of the cards, tuck boxes, and then just like, I mean, I went all in on season two to get this giant box, which was holding everything. And so yeah, but even without season two, I would say it is such a solid, fun 2-player back and forth fighting
Yep.
game. I guess in a way, technically, it's a take that game if we have to put a fighting game into a board game category. It's like take this attack and that attack. But yeah,
Take it off.
it's great, and the fact that it can play fast, you can just kind of keep going at it, switch to a different character quickly, shuffle, get into the fight, and just kind of
Start.
hope for those moments of like, oh, you missed me, punk.
Use your ultimate, but it only has a range of 1, sucker!
Yeah, those times. Oh gosh, yeah, you spend all your gauge, you planned for this, and they just like step out of the way on accident or something. You're like, ah.
Aha, I'm standing here.
Oh, actually, and then one small negative, which is for, yeah, I guess Exceed specifically also. You have 30 life. Should have mentioned this earlier. You have 30 life, both players, but there's no way to track your life.
Yes, that's another
So you
component.
have to use something else, like literally like
Basically, the
paper,
components of
pencil,
track. Yeah,
or
it's the
some app on your
tracking.
phone.
Yeah, any tracking of components outside of like the cards themselves doesn't exist for this game. And there are, yeah, we talked about player turn, right? The like whose advantage, and then life totals. It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of a pain because yeah,
Yes, so
you'd have
that
to
is
track it
true.
separate.
So those are things that I wish it had, even just like some kind of marker that you can pass back and forth
Mm-hmm.
to indicate those
Or like
things.
there have been games that have the little like dials where you can kind of turn a dial to
Oh, you
do
mean like
lifetime
BattleCon,
tracking.
huh?
Something. Well, I mean, other games have done similar things too, right? Not just BattleCon, although that is a great example.
It's like
But
trying
I
to
mean,
get on your better game there, are you?
my thought is probably from a component standpoint as they were trying to simplify a lot.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
they've
yeah.
simplified it to the point where it's like I bet they're just thinking like if you don't have a pen and paper or a phone to
Yeah.
track this, like who are you? Like don't even get on our case. Come on now. But it is kind of a little bit of an annoyance in the sense that like it is part of the game, right? So
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and the cards themselves don't say anything about the life totals on the cards themselves too. Like you actually have to note that in
Mm-hmm.
the rules. Like you have to have read the rules to know it. So
And then the rules actually though, which I should have shown, let me try to show really quickly, are both kind of annoying, kind of nice, because it's just one page of rules, front and back,
that is true.
but it's a big page of rules.
It's a big one page of rules front and back.
Yeah.
But I was gonna say, this is a very level 99 thing to do too, though. They've done this
Yeah.
with Pixel Tactics. They've done this with a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah,
their
just
games.
having the
They'll take it
one
up a
big paper with everything you need to know on it. I mean, and it's usually, I mean, in this case, it is done pretty well. This is the season 2 version. Season 1 is obviously smaller, but still a folded piece of paper. Like, this is done pretty nicely because it does have a lot of the space is pictures of cards, so indicating like what icons mean what, or how a turn is actually set up and things are resolved. So it is helpful. It's just kind of a funky way of doing it.
Yep.
And so with that, I think, yeah, I mean, both of us recommend this game. Hopefully you guys can try it. Hopefully, I mean, John was even mentioning like, hopefully we can play it again
We should play it
soon
again.
sometime.
You really need to be okay with playing tabletop simulator games, man.
I'm okay. I'm okay with it. I just don't want to like show that as the picture of the game because those can look kind of like janky.
That's true.
Come
on,
but yes, you can
man,
play it on Tabletop Simulator, right? And actually, and if you guys are interested, on the Level 99 website, like the one that I was showing you,
oh yeah, that's right.
maybe on their actual home website, not the store, they have released a while back, a long time ago, the Ryu and Ken print and play. So basically, it's a file to actually, if you are the type to do a print and play, printing out your own copies of games to try out, they have that for free on their website. So you can even print out both characters, or two of the same character if you really want, I guess, and play it yourself to try and see if you'll find this interesting, which I think is great that they do that, right? You do see a lot of people over the years do that more, like especially Kickstarters, right? Releasing print and plays for people to try their games first. So it's great that Level 99 does it. Level 99, I think, who's the main guy is D. Brad Talton. I think that's his name. I hope I didn't get your name wrong, because I think he does amazing work. I know there was another Kickstarter that happened a month or so ago that John, yeah, you were also interested in because it was level 99, right? Because they are, one of the things they're known for is, I would say their quality has gotten better over the years, like component quality, box sturdy, and stuff like that. But then they're also known for providing a lot of content with their games, like much more than you would expect for the price of the game. Just like a lot of content. And that's kind of the part that makes their games replayable, right? That there's just so much variety of like characters to choose from, like in the case of Exceed. But then it also, I think, demonstrates the genius of like being able to think up that much stuff in that same game, all this kind of variation on characters and abilities that work together. So I think they do great work. Yeah, and it's cool to see them continue to grow and increase the quality of their stuff and try different games. So, and yeah, John mentioned it was Bullet, and maybe we'll even review it much in the future when it actually comes to us from Kickstarter, or we can even do a preview maybe and talk about what we expect from it at some point. But as with Exceed, we do recommend it. 8.5 from both of us, very high score. And so yeah, hope you guys can check it out if it interests you, and hope you'll share this with your friends if this was helpful. And yeah, until then, we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.